We are recording, so anything you say can be held against you in a court of law. Just joking. Oh, you guys want to hear a joke? I heard some good ones yesterday.
Sure.
So, yesterday I took a group of our senior adults to this senior adult gathering, and so I heard a lot of senior adult jokes. So this is one for your grandparents. So this couple went over to their friend's house for dinner, and after dinner, the women went and talked the women remained in the kitchen and continued to talk, and the men were in the living room talking. And the man who had come over to visit, he said, last night we went out and ate at that new restaurant in town, and it was fantastic. I would highly recommend it. The other guy says, oh yeah? Well, what's the name of it? And the other guy was like, he says, what's that flower that, what's the flower that you buy for your sweetheart every year, and it's red and it's got thorns, and you usually buy a dozen of them. And the other guy's like, oh, a rose. He said, yeah. Hey, Rose, what's the name of that restaurant in town?
Oh, I've heard something like that.
Okay, there you go. So that's what happens when you get older. You forget things. All right, we're continuing the roles of the news media. And we were finishing the second function that they have mentioned in our textbook. The first one was they alert the public to breaking news. And then we talked about how the news media is a carrier of information to the public. Specifically, they are a conduit of information from our political leaders to the public. And even though our branches of government, specifically the presidency and sometimes Congress, they like to use the media to get their information out there, the media still controls, basically, if the president says one thing or gives a report on something, the news media outlets that tend to be opponents to the president will make sure there is a counterpoint of view. And also, the news media can limit how much time information gets. We talked about sound bites. You watch any news at night, and you'll probably get about no more than a 10-second sound bite from any type of politician. And even if you watch, like, for example, something happens like a local flood, and they'll interview somebody whose house got flooded. And I mean, I promise you, they won't even be on there 5 seconds, and they'll have the person say something like, yeah, the flood really came up all of a sudden. And that's all they say. So what they're doing there, whenever they hold on a second, I got a sneeze coming up. Sorry. And it didn't come. I wanted to get rid of it. Anyway, it'll probably come here a little bit. So when the media when they engage in sound bites, they do what's called, or remember we refer to them as gatekeepers. They will do what is called framing. This little political cartoon gives an example of framing, where Andrea Mitchell says, okay, so we edited some news video to make Mitt Romney say something completely different from what he really said. NBC News. And old Mallard Fillmore is watching it here, and she says, give us a break. We're just trying to find our niche. And Fox has that fair and balanced thing already sewn up. So they can frame a news piece really to convey what they wanted to convey exactly, even if that's not what was being conveyed. For example, let's say that there's a KKK rally at the state capitol building. Story number one, or let's say, for example, ABC News from Tulsa is there in Oklahoma City. And they are suggesting that the rally may attract protesters, which might result in violence. And they find a police sergeant from Oklahoma City and interview him about how there was extra security needed to prevent injuries. And so this news reporter has framed this KKK rally as a public safety issue. All right, does that make sense? Okay. Also from Tulsa, they send their CBS station down to Oklahoma City, and they focus on how the KKK, with the First Amendment right to assemble, the KKK is simply doing that. They're exercising their right to voice their opinion. They have a law professor from Oklahoma City University get interviewed, and he's basically talking about the First Amendment right to assemble, that it's protected. And so this news reporter is framing it as a freedom of speech issue. So same rally, but two different reporters deciding how they're going to frame the rally. And let's say originally the KKK was very clear. They were, excuse me, they were gathering simply to, they were gathering to support a, I don't know, let's say a white police officer who was accused of racism. That was their intention, but the two news media, they framed it as something different. So any questions there? Now that was just something I made up, hypothetical. Let's take something that happened about 5 years ago. A Hispanic man who was part of a neighborhood watch saw a young African American in the neighborhood and thought he was breaking in to a home and shot him, and he died. The boy's name was Trayvon Martin. I can't remember this man's name. Maybe somebody can help me out there. Anybody remember? course, you guys are probably like 12. Anyway, this is one example of framing. Some of your national liberal-leaning news outlets would have used this picture. Trayvon was 12 in this picture. He was actually 17 when he died. They used a 12-year-old picture of him, and then they used a picture of the other guy in an orange shirt, which looks like a what? It's like a prisoner jumpsuit. And he's smiling and he's looking kind of menacing. Now, people see that, and, you know, just based on our first impressions, instincts, he looks kind of like a mean criminal type. He's kind of pale skinned there for a Hispanic, and that he shot this guy because he was a racist. Well, maybe a station like Fox, more conservative leaning, they had these pictures. And they show the guy here looking more Hispanic, smiling, suit and tie. They show Trayvon with a more of a menacing look at 17 instead of 12. So again, an example of framing. And it's done both in the print media and in the television media. They take pieces and put them together in a way that will fit their agenda. They're framing it just like someone would frame a certificate or a picture or a diploma and decorate it however they want to. So that is a part of the even though they are to be a common carrier to our leaders, they can still take what the leaders say, or they can take a story and frame it the way they want to. So any questions on that? Just a couple of weeks ago, there was another example. Maybe you guys heard about the African-American girl who said 3 white boys in her class cut her dreadlocks. Did you hear about that story? No. So how did the national news report it? African-American girl has her dreadlocks cut by her 3 white boy classmates. Well, it came out a few days later that she made it up, kind of like Jussie Smollett. And when it came out that she recanted and said she made it up, the news media said simply, girl whose hair was cut by classmates made story up. They didn't mention African American, they didn't mention white. And so that is framing. Okay, so a third role of the mass media is the role of a watchdog. And your assignment for this module is to do a report about well, is it the report or is it the discussion?
I think it's the discussion.
Yep, there it is. Okay. So you'll want to really take note of this and grasp this concept. And it's not real hard. It's just simply where they are functioning as a group that exposes corruption in our leaders. They expose any scandals, any kind of hypocrisy, anything that might be intriguing to the public. And this is probably the function we see the most. And right now we're hearing about it every day with the President Trump's phone call to the Ukrainian president. So in the assignment, you will be watching some videos of these two guys right here, Bob Woodward and Bernstein. I can't remember his first name right now, but these were the two reporters that kind of broke the Watergate scandal of Richard Nixon in 1972. And this is when the watchdog function of media really just exploded. I mean, you had them doing things before, but with all of the intrigue and mystery and, I'm going to use another great word, shenanigans going on with the Watergate scandal, it just exploded, and it just became something that, you know, reporters that were coming into newspapers wanted to be like a Woodward or a Bernstein and find something groundbreaking to report. So you're going to watch those two guys today as they talk about it. And there was a great Hollywood movie made about it called All the President's Men. But it started with them, and it continues today very strong, and it just gained steam in the last 4 decades, and especially during election cycles where they will be scrutinizing and analyzing candidates. And boy, we are really in a time where, well, because of social media, candidates, anyone who runs for office, there's things that they can check now so easily. Here's some other examples that happened before the explosion of social media. But nowadays we could add WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was a major player in the exposure of Hillary Clinton's 30,000 plus emails that she used. Instead of using the government email server, she used her private server. Which it looks like she's trying to hide something. WikiLeaks exposed that, plus a lot of her aides emails. Facebook and Twitter. This is not related to politics, but you know, last year Kyler Murray won the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah, he did.
And within 2 hours of him winning the Heisman Trophy, some reporter had found some of his Twitter posts from when he was like 15 years old, and he had made some jokes like most 15-year-olds do, which could have been which had some, you know, terms you probably shouldn't say to somebody. I don't know exactly what it was, but I mean, within 2 hours of him winning the award, this guy had dug it up. And so if any of you ever have aspirations of running for public office, you need to be careful what you put on your social media. Even today, old high school and college yearbooks are being used to dig up dirt. Just last month, this guy named Justin Trudeau, he is the Canadian Prime Minister. Somebody dug up his old college yearbook where he had put on brown face. Last year, this guy here, Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, someone dug up an old college yearbook of his where he was in. Actually, he never told if he was the guy in blackface or the guy with the KKK hood. And just as a side note, he was a Democrat and he did not step down. And then Brett Kavanaugh was President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court. And, you know, some woman that went to a woman's private school in Washington, D.C. while he was at his boys' private school accused him of sexual assault, and people dug out his yearbook. And here, I think this was his junior year, and they looked through, you know, I don't know if they still do, I don't think they still do it in yearbooks, but they used to put these little things by your picture of everything you did, and then you could put down your own little sayings. And they were trying to figure out, like, well, I mean, 100 kegs or bust, that's kind of easy to figure out. And that didn't sweat him because he said he liked to drink beer. But they were asking him about, what is this Renate alumnus? What is this Devil's Triangle? What are these things? And so they were looking for something to, you know, create a scandal, expose him so that he couldn't become Supreme Court justice. So that's the watchdog function of the media. And I would say that in some of these aspects, they're moving beyond being an objective watchdog. They have become a biased player in the political game, trying to stop someone of the opposite agenda. Questions? And just to let you guys know, even if you're not going to be a public official, when you go in for job interviews, there are places now that will check your social media before they hire you. So you got to be careful of what you put on there. God bless you. All right, so the fourth role of the media is a partisan role. We might call it bias. And at one time we would have said, we don't want them to engage in this role. We want them to be objective. But with the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987 and the rise of cable TV, FM radio, and now the internet and all the social media, you have, or we have, media organizations cropping up, and they are specifically created to present their view. So looking at these major news medias, 6 of them here, and this is a pretty accurate graph of how they fall. The blue would be more liberal, and it's on the left, so left-leaning. And then the red would be conservative, to the right. Fox News is a conservative news outlet. They were created in 1996 specifically for that purpose. MSNBC started about 4 years later. They were specifically created to be a far left group to counter Fox. These three here, the big three from the 1960s and 70s, even into the 1950s, NBC, ABC, CBS, today they would be still in a more liberal leaning area, but they're closer to the center than MSNBC. CNN was started in 1980 by Ted Turner. And if I was to change this, I would put CNN over here and put these three more over here. So those are the major television outlets. And even though there's been studies done that, for the most part, these groups right here in the middle these studies have shown that they are fairly objective. Now, you do have more reporters and anchors in these groups that are more left-leaning, but they found overall that the reporting of their stories were fairly objective. What has been, what Americans see as a bias in the media is the constant reporting on negative news. There definitely is a bias in the media in their preference for negative news. And maybe you've heard the saying, and if not, this is a new saying for you. If a car has 3 flat tires and 1 tire that's still aired up, they're going to focus on the tire that's aired up. No, I'm sorry, I had that reversed. 3 tires aired up and 1 tire flat. They're going to focus on the flat tire. They're going to focus on the bad news. So let me see here. Here is a chart of all of the new media and where they kind of fall. So in the middle, and these would be your most neutral news outlets. I'm not sure what the Hill is, but Business Insider, C-SPAN, C-SPAN 2, C-SPAN 3, all these, they say, would be your most neutral, objective news outlets. And then as you go to the right, here's your conservative, the hyper conservative, and then what people call the conservative garbage, the stuff that it's kind of like conspiracy theories. And I'm very curious about this one called Pulpit and Pen, since I stand behind a pulpit every Sunday. And then leaning left, there's our groups that we talked about earlier. It's got newspapers included in here, internet groups, your hyper liberal, and then the garbage ones. And here we see, taking off the 2 garbage ends, you can see up close the spectrum there. And this here does not include today. There are a lot of YouTubers and bloggers who put out almost daily videos. So that's not including them. So how has the media transformed to become a very partisan, or to have this very partisan function? Again, here's your big three from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And starting in the 80s until now, we are blessed with all of these wondrous news outlets and more. And you'll probably want to know these three categories, which are in your textbook. The traditional media, which is your newspapers, your big three, they are mostly neutral. Again, mostly neutral. Your talk shows, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, they are mostly conservative. Those two men, I think their two shows are the highest. These are their radio shows, because Hannity is also on Fox News on TV. But Limbaugh and Hannity's radio programs are I believe the two highest political radio programs. So talk shows are more conservative. You do have some left-leaning talk shows. Bill Maher, Politically Incorrect on HBO, is liberal-leaning. You have several people like Rachel Maddow and Chris Matthews on MSNBC, very left-leaning, but their shows are not as popular as Limbaugh and Hannity. And then you have many new internet outlets, and they are mostly liberal. Your websites, your blogs, your YouTubers. So traditional media, mostly neutral. Talk shows, mostly conservative or heavily conservative. The internet groups, mostly liberal. And as you are getting into the internet groups, you are dealing with much more opinion and less information. So if you only want to listen to somebody who thinks exactly like you do, find one of those internet personalities. If you are a person who likes to hear both sides and you decide for yourself, stick with the neutral. Now I say that. I would listen to all of them if you could. And use the neutral ones to kind of gauge the more extreme ones. But anyway. So a big question that is in our textbook is, with all of these choices now to get our news, instead of just these three, shouldn't we be more united than ever as a country? We have all these choices to find information. And the truth is that the opposite has taken place. We are now more fragmented as a society and divided And it's a very sharp divide. And it's a very sharp divide, and there's many labels for the two sides. You have the red states and the blue states. You have the liberals and the conservatives. You have the left and the right. And some people even would put Democrats and Republicans in there, and you do have that. But we have become essentially the divided states of America. Anybody want to guess why that is? With all these choices.
We're divided by our two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans.
Do what now?
We're divided by opinions, and the Democrats and the Republicans.
Okay, so you're saying the political views that we already hold will then basically stay that way, even though there's a lot of news sources. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. And certainly a lot of people will seek out the sources of news that think or are most closely to how they think. Good observation. But there's a couple of more reasons why we're so polarized today. Before you had all this, remember there was just this. And families used to eat their evening meal together and then go into the living room and watch the evening news. Or they would watch the evening news while they ate their dinner. And even the kids would sit and watch the news with their parents. Now, they didn't like the news, but there was nothing else on. They had to wait for the news to end to watch maybe something that they liked. So with these major three groups presenting the news, and they basically, remember, they were all getting their news from the Associated Press or another organization called Reuters, and they were all reporting on the same stories and basically sharing the same core facts. And there was little opinion. And so most Americans were getting the same news. And even if your family was a CBS family and the family across the street was an ABC family, you still pretty much got the same news. And so everything they knew about their politicians and their government and what was going on in the world was the same. And that's what they talked about the next day at work. With more news outlets, and some of them being very target specific. For example, the group on here, if I can find them here. Well, I'll just stick with the good old Fox News. Those people that live in the red states, which would be Oklahoma, people who are conservative, people who are against abortion, and people who are, used to be against marijuana and against public nudity, used to be anyway, they would watch Fox News. So they would say, forget ABC and NBC, we're going to watch Fox. And then they might like one of the persons on there, like Hannity or Tucker Carlson. So they watch his program too. In the same way with someone on the left. they are going to watch MSNBC and get their opinions from Rachel Maddow, and it is going to make the divide that much more tense. And you're going to get opinion from these stations as opposed to more objective information. And so, but here's another thing about these news outlets. They just don't offer news. They offer, just like they did back then, they offer entertainment. But now, the kids don't have to stay in the living room after supper or during supper and watch the news. Most kids have their own TV, or they've got a Kindle or a iPad or whatever it is, and they can watch whatever they want to watch. And there's Netflix, and most people are going to, or most people do choose entertainment over news information. And so the ones that are tuning into the news, they're becoming more and more polarized against each other. And even there are politicians who are pushing the Democrats versus Republicans, as we mentioned earlier. Even they will mention, well, Trump has his Fox News and they're in his corner, and they're basically like a state TV now. But before that, Obama had MSNBC and CNN, and we've got that divide, and that's going to stay that way. I believe personally, as long as people do not try to understand how their government works and are responsible citizens who are informed on the issues and exercise their right to vote, we're going to continue to see this. So the news audience is divided because of political parties, as I think it was Connor who mentioned that, and because of the information divide now. Any questions before we head to the house? Well, I guess you guys have more school.
No. No.
All right, so we'll start chapter 11 on Friday. And was there a question or comment at the beginning of the class?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, have a good Wednesday and Thursday.
You too.